The Iron Lady. Thatcher traces the end of her premiership tonight at 9 on BBC Two. But right now, a more contemporary leadership challenge is under the spotlight.
It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me, Conservative peer and Times journalist Danny Finkelstein, Labour MP Rushanara Ali, columnist for The Intercept and presenter for Al Jazeera English Mehdi Hasan, and Leavers of Britain campaigner Suzanne Evans. Today, no prizes for guessing who they're talking about.
He should be here to answer that very question.
Boris Johnson didn't turn up, so who's ahead after the first TV debate? Who is Labour's deputy leader talking to?
Only a public vote can break this deadlock, but we will only achieve this if Labour fights for it and champions it.
And as if there wasn't enough happening here, we'll talk to Mehdi Hasan about politics in America.
You kill the family of a terror suspect, yes or no?
I would have to see what the circumstances of that situation was.
Are you kidding me?
So, the debate last night, perhaps the biggest story is that Boris Johnson wasn't there, but did he win or lose by not taking part, Danny?
He won is the right thing to do. Actually, the best thing that I've heard about Boris Johnson in this campaign is very little, because one of the arguments for his leadership that his team makes is he has the discipline to follow, a group idea and a tight campaign strategy, and actually he's doing that. It's very annoying for the rest of us, but elections are about winning, and you use the strategy that's the right one for winning them. He's doing that, so I suppose the best signal he's sending out from that is I've got the discipline to follow a plan and not just wing it.
What did you think, Rushanara? Did he win or lose by not participating in the debate?
What's really shocking is that this man wants to be the Prime Minister of our country, and he doesn't have the guts to go and join a debate with his colleagues. So, I'm really surprised by what Danny's saying, because, you'd think that Boris Johnson should have the confidence to be able to join a TV studio to make his case and make the argument about why he should be Prime Minister.
I don't particularly approve of it, but that's not the question. It's how to win, and it's how to win, Yeah.
And he is going to be in the TV studios tomorrow evening in the BBC debate. But do you agree, was it a lack of guts, confidence, or a strategy?
I think it's a bit of both. I think the strategy can be why take a risk, and that shows a lack of guts, because, Boris is often compared to Trump, and I'm sure we're going to talk about Trump later in the show, but Donald Trump loves to run his mouth, and Danny's right to point out that Boris, when he has run his mouth in the past, hasn't always worked out for him. It's best to kind of keep your front-runner status, keep your head down, not go on a channel, what was it, floating voters? It's then people who aren't even going to vote in this Tory leadership contest. But it's not just a TV studio, of course. Right now, I believe there are hustings going on with lobby journalists.
And he's not there either.
He's not there either. So I think from a cynical, self-serving perspective, it's the right thing to do. From a democracy point of view, it's outrageous that the man who wants to be Prime Minister in a few weeks' time cannot subject himself to media scrutiny. And when he does, his supporters boo the journalists who asked him a tough question last week. Right,
let's just show our viewers the Daily Mirror front page, Suzanne, before I come to you. Johnson dodges TV debate. Chicken Boris. Is that how you see it?
No, I don't. I actually disagree. I think it actually took guts not to turn up to that debate last night, because Channel 4 made it clear they were going to put an empty podium there. To still not appear and know that you're going to be facing that kind of humiliation, if you like, I think was very brave of him. And let's be clear. What is the point of these debates, really? Most of the people watching them can't vote for the candidate, so that it's pretty pointless in that sense. And I think this might have been great titillation, 90 minutes of titillation for Channel 4 last night. But look at what they did. They introduced them all as being male, like we couldn't see that for ourselves. They rolled out their private school backgrounds. They let them all take chunks out of each other. I think it was, as Boris said, it was a bit of a kangaroo court, really, all pretty pointless.
All right, we're going to discuss it further in a moment, but let's show our viewers and give them a flavour of that debate.
We've been talking about Brexit for 25 minutes now, and where is Boris? If his team won't allow him out to debate with 5 pretty friendly colleagues, how's he going to fare with 27 European countries? He should be here to answer that very question.
I'm not saying this because I want no deal. I'm saying it because I want to keep our promises. Give ourselves the best.
Dom,
just a sec, Michael. Give ourselves
Parliament to
the
vote.
best shot.
We cannot leave.
Of the best deal.
We cannot leave
And
unless
Michael,
Parliament
I'm afraid
votes for it, Dom.
You would buckle because you've shown you would take another extension. You would take no deal off the table. You said that you would accept
I won't
legislation.
buckle. I will defend our democracy, Dom.
Legislation.
I will
on a
defend
second
our
referendum.
democracy.
When you do
and
all of
you
that,
cannot take Britain
you
out of the
rob
European
ourselves
Union
of
against
best
the will
chance
of Parliament.
of the best deal.
Every time I have this debate, everyone's like, trust me, I'm going to do it. I'm the guy. I can defeat the impossible odds. And I'm accused of being a defeatist by trying to be realistic about this. It reminds me of it. I was trying to cram a whole series of rubbish bins into the rubbish bin. And my wife said, you're never going to get these 3 huge bags of rubbish in. And I was tempted, like Michael and like Dom, to say, believe in the bin, believe in Britain, right? It's nonsense.
It's important to have someone that can unite people. And my own background, my life experience is it's fair to say it's very different from a Conservative leaders of the past. I'm not from central casting, you know, and I think that can make a difference, that if you have someone that is different, you have a different messenger that can help bring people together.
Well, that was a taste of last night's debate. Let me welcome Vicky Young, the BBC's chief political correspondent, onto the studio floor. While you're settling in, Danny, who came out of it well?
I thought that probably Sajid Javid getting over his message. He needs a lot of momentum. That probably came out best. I don't think any of them absolutely sparkled. Rory does very, very well, providing you think that message is at all sellable with Conservative voters, which it isn't. And mostly it's not. I mean, to be honest, I love that message, but if you elected me as the leader, it would be a catastrophe because Conservative voters aren't buying that anymore. So that position that he's taking, despite the fact that it's quite close to mine, is impossible. He's very impressive. He does it impressively. I think his point about the bins is correct, but Conservative voters don't.
Right. Well, on that, Vicky, will it have changed any minds amongst the electorate that counts here?
Well, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Without Boris Johnson there, I thought it was tricky, wasn't it? You know, I was thinking about analogies, thinking it's like a party without wine, it's like Glastonbury without the headliner, it's like a cake without sugar. But it means...
You have been thinking about it, haven't you, Vicky?
The others they're scrapping.
Boris Johnson is sugar.
Depends if you like sugar or not.
I love sugar.
It does mean that the others are scrapping for second place, aren't they? And so that is the point here. So, interestingly, for Boris Johnson, he didn't turn up, but Matt Hancock has endorsed him. And it is about where those other votes are going to go in the second round tomorrow. And there is talk of Rory Stewart, although not probably going to go down well with the electorate, that there are MPs who don't want Boris Johnson, who are thinking we want him, at least in the BBC debate tomorrow evening, because he will lay into Boris Johnson and really challenge him. And that's what some of them are looking at, and maybe we'll get behind him to give him enough people.
And the rest of the stages?
So tomorrow night is the second round. The bottom person drops out, plus anyone who doesn't get 33 votes. So they are all absolutely desperately trying to do that. Then after that, on Wednesday, there'll be round 3, and then on Thursday, potentially round 4 or 5 if we need it. What we haven't been able to establish, though, is what if Boris Johnson gets a huge number and everyone else gets 32 tomorrow? Could he be Prime Minister?
Well, and of course
we haven't
that's
got an answer to that.
Right. Well, have you got an answer for that?
That's not going to happen. So I know the question, but it doesn't require an answer.
Right. In terms of how edifying it was for Tory politicians to be sort of lumping chunks out of each other, and picking up on Suzanne's point, was it a pointless debate?
Were they really taking chunks out of each other? They was quite kind of fairly polite. You showed a bit of Dominic Raab and Michael Gove saying who's going to be tougher, who's going to be the better bin man, to borrow Rory's analogy. But I don't think they were really taking chunks out of each other. What's interesting is you saw the Labour leadership contest in 2010 and the other Labour leadership contest in 2015. People were falling over one another to talk about, were you an heir to Blair or Brown? Do we disown the past? I didn't see any of that in last night's debate. I didn't see any real reckoning with the Tory record in office, with the coalition years, with austerity. I mean, yes, Brexit dominates everything, as I discover every time I turn back up in the UK. But it's bizarre that in a Tory leadership election where you've had these two, this disastrous prime ministership, and I would argue also the Cameron disaster, that you don't have any candidate really saying anything about the Tory legacy.
You mean in a Tory cabinet, they don't all think the Tory record was a disaster, because they don't, obviously, because they differ from your...
But Labour, but even Labour leadership contenders were open enough.
Yes,
there was actual proper debate in both 10 and 15.
There's a critique of there wasn't obviously a debate at all while Labour Party was in office.
No, but during the leadership campaign.
But when the party's out of office, they could be more critical of its record. These are all people who are serving in the current government, and obviously they don't agree with you about that. Neither do I, by the way, about austerity or why it was
Which is why they didn't take chunks out of each other. They pretty much do agree on everything apart from Brexit.
I do, and I do think we're facing, pretty important. So I think the most interesting exchange was about prorogation of Parliament. It was interesting how firm Michael Gove was. I do think if anyone did try to press that really would bring down the government. I'm not sure pressing for no deal would. I think that's a much more difficult thing to judge. But I do think prorogation, an attempt at prorogation, would bring down the government. And I thought it was pretty interesting how heated the debate was about that. And by the way, in that respect, I thought Michael Gove was correct and that Dominic Raab's position is outrageous.
You obviously disagree with that. I mean, Dominic Raab did feel like a lone voice in that debate, but possibly one that many party grassroots members would agree with.
OK, so we're talking to Conservative Party members here, and Conservative Party members, in the main, are now supportive of a potential no-deal Brexit. Of course, yes, we'd all rather have a nice deal, but it's quite clear that May's deal, the way the Tory party's been hemorrhaging support as a result of that dreadful deal, it means that there's got to be a deal that's much tougher and doesn't keep us so tied into the European Union as that one does. So we're talking about Conservative Party members here. So they would want to vote for a candidate who is not afraid of no deal, and potentially one that isn't afraid of shutting down Parliament as well. And whether you can do that or not and what the fallout might be is one thing. But, as I say, if whoever wins wants to get Tory members on board and wants their votes, they've got to have a very tough line on Brexit.
Mehdi?
I mean, astonishing how we can just casually talk about shutting down Parliament. I thought the whole Brexit debate was about democracy and saving parliamentary sovereignty.
But how casually, Mehdi, have people been talking about ignoring the will of 17.4 million people
this is
in
a parliamentary
referendum
democracy.
result?
I mean, it was an advisory referendum.
You could argue that. No, it wasn't. I'm sorry. No. Let's bang this on the head.
What's more important, keeping Parliament open?
Well, I don't think
the government will implement what you decide.
Well, agreed.
Right, don't talk over each other. One at a time.
Why put prorogation on the table? It's outrageous. As you said,
obviously completely against our traditions of democracy to have prorogation, and it's outrageous. But it would also be completely wrong to ignore the result of a referendum that everybody in Parliament called.
Depends what you define as ignore, right? Nobody's saying ignore. People saying I'll have a second referendum or have a general election. Actually, I don't think you're ignoring a referendum.
People aren't intellectually honest about this. Lots of people do essentially want us to set it aside and have another referendum because they didn't like the result. That is really the truth of not a majority of people, but certainly 25% of the population and 25% of MPs.
But interestingly, he was out on a limb, it seems, amongst his colleagues there, Dominic Raab, with that line on prorogation and also no deal.
And I think that's why, obviously, he's going to be far more popular with the membership if it gets to that than Michael Gove is, for instance.
Well, can I just say, what I found extraordinary about this debate was most of the candidates yesterday behaved like they haven't been in power for the last 9 years, that they hadn't lost control of law and order, that they hadn't decimated the National Health Service, cut education funding, and they're talking like they're just all of a sudden they're brand new candidates. They haven't got a legacy. The second thing, can I just add one thing, which is linked to the point about the Tory party having leadership contest and foisting another unelected Prime Minister on the country, refusing to rule out a general election or a public vote. But they can have elections to elect a new Prime Minister and treat the country like the public are bystanders to the next Prime Minister. And at the same time, the audacity to say... Let me finish. I didn't interrupt you. The audacity to then deny the public the opportunity to vote on the deal that Theresa May has negotiated or the option to remain is totally hypocritical.
Danny.
It is utterly disgraceful what Conservatives are doing to the British people and their future and their livelihoods. This is the Tory party having a collective nervous breakdown while the country suffers and there's no clarity about what's going to happen to our future. It is not acceptable.
First of all, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Secondly, thank you. The Gordon Brown didn't have an election at all when he stood
he should have done.
Leader of the Labour Party.
Hang on, let's see.
And if there had been an election, obviously it would have been the Labour Party that had elected that person, and then Parliament would have decided whether it would have confidence in them. And by the way, that's not any longer a theoretical issue, actually. The Conservative Party not only has to choose a leader, but that leader has to maintain the confidence of Parliament. And it's not certain they'll be able to. So that's how a parliamentary democracy works and how our parliamentary democracy has always worked. But I do agree. It has always worked.
Not with party members voting for the Prime Minister.
It has always worked that the parties choose their candidate.
Not with the membership in the country.
But parties choose their own candidates by whatever method they choose. But I do accept your point, which is if parties do that, it is a bit unappetising if some of the leaders don't then debate with the public. And I thought you had a good point when you said that.
Before we go on, Boris Johnson is turning up to one debate, as we've said, tomorrow. Let's just remind you.
The race to become our next Prime Minister is on, with the Conservative Party voting on their new leader in the coming weeks. Join me, Emily Maitlis, for a BBC debate as I challenge the candidates as they answer your questions. Our Next Prime Minister, tomorrow, 8 p.m. on BBC One.
On Boris Johnson, how big an impact is it that Matt Hancock has thrown his support behind him?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is significant. Obviously, there are some saying, well, this was Matt Hancock deciding to do it now rather than wait a few weeks. And I think by being so far ahead in terms of MPs' endorsements and, of course, the polling amongst the Tory party members, it does mean that everyone's looking at Boris Johnson thinking, well, he's pretty much going to be Prime Minister in 5 weeks and I still want a job. So there is an element of that going on. Matt Hancock, of course, doesn't put it like that. He thinks that Boris Johnson is the person who can unite the party and unite the country. And there are others who do fundamentally, of course, disagree.
Well, let me just show this in the Times. I'm backing Johnson to be our next Prime Minister, says Hancock. In that article, he refers to the fact that he thinks it's going to be the Boris Johnson who is a one-nation Tory, who is a Liberal London mayor. What do you think he said to Matt Hancock to persuade him?
Well, first of all, actually, I think Matt Hancock was remarkably frank, actually, that he thinks Boris Johnson's going to win, and that was a major reason for thinking, well, I may as well back him now if I'm going to serve for him, and it was remarkably explicit about that, actually. I think that there's always been a feeling on the sort of centre-left and social liberal party members, of which I would regard myself as part, that Boris Johnson belongs to that. But you can never be completely sure with him. And because I don't actually think that's the best explanation of his politics. I think he's much more a sort of cavalier against a roundhead attitude, that he doesn't like social restrictions because he sort of doesn't take any of them that seriously. I think that is generally his stance. So I think social liberal and one nation is to systematise a much more messy person.
Yes, I agree with that. And I also think this is also a man, let's not forget, who wrote 2 versions of an op-ed on whether to stay or leave the European Union, and is now the man who's supposedly going to do it on October 31st, no matter what. We know he's a man of his word, so that will definitely happen. I think Danny's right. It's not just about the lack of the messiness, but he's deeply unreliable. You asked the question, what did he say to Matt Hancock? Whatever it takes. It's Boris Johnson. Remember what he said to Michael Howard?
Some of the candidates will think by getting in there now, especially the cabinet members, they can influence Boris Johnson, potentially, by backing him now, and then they can maybe try and get the London Mayor Boris Johnson rather than the
Well, and Suzanne, is that a worry for
you?
you, if Vicky is right, and those people are going to shape Boris Johnson in the sense that he is much more chairman than chief executive? What does that say?
I think it's a worry, whoever takes over, whether or not they're going to deliver Brexit by the 31st of October, which is when, of course, the Leavers want to see it delivered by at the absolute outset. I think Boris has invested so much. It was a very bold move of him to come out and back Vote Leave during the referendum campaign. Notwithstanding, Mehdi, the 2 articles, you could look at that and say, well, you know, pros and cons, we all have to do that in life. We all have to weigh up. Boris has spent a lot of time working in Europe. He came out for leave. There's nothing wrong with writing 2...
But can he face both ways now when he's trying to appeal both ways?
Yeah, he can't appeal both ways.
I actually rather agree with that. I've never been critical of him for that whole process, because we all went through the process of thinking, well, I'm very Eurosceptic. In the end, I thought leaving was a complete mistake, and I went through that process earlier than he did, admittedly. But I don't think it's completely unprincipled to do that. But I think what's fairer, Mehdi, is when you
balancing pros and cons.
Wait a minute.
Leader of the Leave
you can't all talk over each other. So what did you say?
I said it's not the same thing.
He wasn't the leader of the Leave.
Hang on.
He was setting himself up. We're just ignoring the domestic politics of this. This is a guy who always wanted to be Prime Minister. Yep. David Cameron knows why he did that. He did it for purely personal reasons. And this is a man who, by the way, you say it's nuanced. Well, he didn't show any nuance since switching. This is a guy, when he was London Mayor, was pro the single market, pro immigration. We haven't seen any of that.
Right. Well, on that though, Rushanara, London Mayor, London did love Boris, or certainly some of it, and he could be the Liberal Mayor that you would be more comfortable with.
What I would say about Boris Johnson is that he is consistently for Boris Johnson. As London Mayor, it was appropriate for him to appeal to a more socially liberal agenda, because London is much more liberal. Yeah. So that's what he did. And now he's playing to a much more right-wing agenda, which is why his position has changed, including on things like his attack on Muslim women and inciting violence against them, because he's copying Trump. And the pound shop Trump analogy is correct, actually. He is pandering to the worst excesses of intolerance, and that is dangerous. So I think anyone anyone who thinks they can moderate Boris Johnson's behaviour should think again, because he's going to do what's in his interest to be Prime Minister and hold on to power. That is not in the national interest. That's what Boris Johnson is really about.
Saying that basically doing what your constituents want is a bad thing. Boris Johnson did this because he was mayor of London.
Hang on.
Boris Johnson did this when he was mayor of London because London is like this. He was representing London. If he was representing a different part of the UK, he'd probably do something different again. This is not an argument for dishonesty. It's an argument for actually listening to what your
Mehdi, Rushanara mentioned Donald Trump. And actually, Rushanara's point that he'll do whatever it takes, which won't be the first time in politics for anybody who has ambitions to be leader. Yeah. Once he becomes Prime Minister is what we're discussing, what will happen then. But Donald Trump seems to be backing Boris Johnson. Is that a help or a hindrance?
I honestly don't know. With the Tory party membership, probably not a hindrance, and that's the key point here. By the way, on the Trump, that's another position he did a complete U-turn on. This is a guy who said Trump was doing the work of the terrorists and now thinks Trump is the greatest thing since sliced bread. But what's interesting on the Tory party membership, when you talk about it's a phrase, Danny, I don't know if you've heard it. It's not a literal
I haven't heard
quote.
it literally, so I just wondered when he... Sorry, you just said he said that, and I'd never heard it.
I apologise, let me rephrase. He's praised Trump excessively. Coming back to the point about the constituency, this idea that you just change your views based on your constituency is absurd. And also, he's trying to become Prime Minister of the UK, not just Conservative Party leader. The constituency right now is the whole UK, but of course, as we discussed earlier, the rules are that it's 160,000 people, 70% male, 97% white, average age of 57.
All right.
It's not a representative crowd picking the Prime Minister.
Hang on. Let Danny respond. First of all, though, on the claim about what he said about Trump.
Is that because Rushanara and Mehdi massively overstate these things, you then put yourself on the other side. So let me just say where I agree with you. I think you're right in thinking...
to say he's attacked Muslim women and incited violence.
Hang on. Let Danny respond.
Of course he has.
What did he do then?
Hang on. We're having two conversations here. Right, Danny, respond first.
Thank you. My view is that Boris Johnson, you're quite correct, Mehdi. He does say what pleases people who are in front of him. I also think that you're correct to say that what he said about letterboxes was disgraceful, and that he's taken insufficient care with a lot of his language. I don't actually happen to think, but I may prove wrong, that is a well thought through political strategy. For example, that insult, which I thought was appalling, was in the middle of an article which actually took a liberal view on the issue he was addressing.
Oh, so it's all right?
No, I didn't say. I just said it wasn't all right.
So you shouldn't even be defending it.
I didn't. I tried to explain exactly what I thought in full so that people could understand it. Boris, we'll learn more about what Boris Johnson is because I think he is actually quite complex to understand. But I do think there are real questions over his willingness to say whatever gets him forward in front of the people that he is in, and I therefore think those of us who hope he'll be socially liberal do have some cause to worry.
All right, we're going to move on. Vicky, I want to show you and obviously our viewers and guests this tweet from Rory Stewart. Let me explain. There have been hustings going on. Journalists have been asking questions. Sorry, this is from Matt Chorley at The Times. Rory Stewart has said, "My pitch is this. I am not going to pitch to you. #lobby hustings."
That's because we don't have a vote, I guess. So he's decided. I mean, he's taking a very different approach, I guess, to all of this.
All the way through.
And I think it's interesting. Now, there's a lot more love for him on Twitter, I would say, than there maybe is within the Conservative Party, which will be an issue. But he has mixed it up a bit, and I think for those who really don't want Boris Johnson, that's the Conservative Party members, I think they do want to see Boris Johnson tested, and so that's why it may well be that against the odds he does manage to sneak through tomorrow.
Right. Do you think he's got momentum, Rory Stewart?
Has he got momentum to get into the next round? And what, does he have to double his number of MPs to get through tomorrow? I mean, as much as I like his message, as Danny put, I like him attacking the no deal. The problem is, one thing that didn't come out of the Channel 4 debate is, maybe I missed it, what is his plan to get a deal through that's been rejected 3 times for a 4th time? I didn't hear...
Right. Citizens' Assembly.
There isn't a plan.
There isn't a plan.
Right. And on
so he's living in as much a fancy land as Dominic Raab is.
Right.
Theresa May had the only plan, right? Yeah. And they've got rid of Theresa May.
And he was a cheerleader.
If you ask me the question, who did I want to be the Prime Minister, that's the answer. Because once they got rid of her, they've now got no choice. They've got choice between no deal and no Brexit with nothing in between. And the people who wanted to have no Brexit have ended up in a situation where they've empowered Farage and they're going to get Boris Johnson as leader of the Conservative Party against Jeremy Corbyn. And the people who want no deal have ended up endangering the Brexit they voted for. And none of them have been willing to compromise. And that is a disaster for all of us. So who won the debate? Nobody won.
Who are you
debate.
backing?
Sorry, at this point, I thought it would have been, as I say, it would have been better if Theresa May had won. Boris is going to win the election. I'd quite like to see Sajid Javid in the last round battling Boris because it shows what the future of the Conservative Party can be about.
So, Vicky, that is really the point, isn't it? That for most of those candidates, they are still trying to do what Theresa May tried to do and failed, which is to build a bridge between the two sides within the Tory party and the country with a deal that couldn't get through Parliament. And there isn't much difference with Sajid Javid or Jeremy Hunt or Michael Gove on this.
No, and also they all talk about renegotiating. Now, the timings for that, OK, the end of October, it's actually not that very far away. How are they going to do it is less clear. They're not really saying how they're going to do it, apart from by being someone other than Theresa May. They're obviously hoping that the European Union might, have a bit of goodwill because they've seen one Prime Minister brought down by it, and actually maybe that will be some kind of oiling the wheels that can get a change. But they're not entirely clear. What's interesting as well about Michael Gove and Jeremy Hunt particularly, they're saying that they would go for no deal if they had to, but they think Parliament will block it. So actually, what are they saying about that? What happens at that point? I mean, it is still incredibly unclear.
Well, with that conclusion, what are they saying about that? We look forward to tomorrow's debate. Thank you very much, Vicky. Let's talk about Labour, because the Deputy Leader, Tom Watson, has been speaking in London today. Let's have a listen.
Our future doesn't need to be Brexit. So now is the time to speak out more loudly than ever, before any further irreparable damage is done. Only a public vote can break this deadlock, but we will only achieve this if Labour fights for it and champions it. We must do that in Parliament and around the country. Labour must make the positive case.
Rushanara, why does the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party have to give a public speech in order to persuade the Leader of the Labour Party to give full-throated backing for a second referendum?
He's giving a public speech to win the argument among the wider public, as well as to,
who's he talking
as well as to address some of the concerns that some of my colleagues have. Of course, there are differences of views about whether we should have another referendum, and it's right that we should be making the case and winning the argument. I think it's really important that the Labour Party gets off the fence. The front bench position is problematic. We did have a motion at conference which was supported. All the other options have been exhausted. Some would argue that we need to call for a general election in the light of the Tory leadership contest, and I have a lot of sympathy for that argument. If that fails, we still need to move towards breaking the deadlock, which is why the Labour Party needs to move forward and be unambiguous in its position for a public vote. And that's what Tom is doing.
So who are you and Tom Watson trying to persuade?
Well, we need to persuade those of our colleagues who are sceptical about a public vote.
Does that include Ian Lavery, who is the chairman of the Labour Party, Labour MP? Let's show his tweet. Brexit has turned this country into a toxic nation. However, ignoring the 17.4 million Leave voters isn't politically smart, nor indeed particularly democratic, is it?
Well, what I would say to colleagues like Ian Lavery is that the Labour Party has tried the other options. We even had a 6-week negotiation period with the government, and the government wasn't willing to change its red lines. And the only deal that's on the table is the one that Theresa May secured with the European Union. And that's the choice between that and the option to remain in. And what we need to do is be really clear about what we stand for. The Labour Party is not going to be able to out-Brexit the Brexit Party, and nor should they try. And I think some of my colleagues just need to be realistic about what's happening here. And we need, in order to break this deadlock, we need a public vote. We need to put the decision back to the people so that we can be certain that we've got the backing of the British people on whichever direction of travel they want to go down in.
Crazy own goal for the Labour Party, absolutely crazy. The 5 million Labour voters, we think, voted leave in the EU referendum. 56% of Labour seats with sitting Labour MPs voted leave. Labour stood on an election in 2017, an election manifesto backing the referendum. This is a flagrant breach of all that and a kick in the teeth to hard-working Labour voters, supporters and activists out there who support it.
Suzanne, just like in the Tory
Can
party...
I just finish and say, you know, Tom Watson started his speech saying, we have a future and it doesn't have to be Brexit. Well, I'd like to say, Tom Watson, both this country and the Labour Party, if you want to have a democratic future, it's got to be Brexit.
The problem the Labour Party's got, however, is that if it doesn't support a second referendum, it'll be undercut by the Liberal Democrats in a serious way. It's just like people like me face that problem with the Conservative Party, which is that the base vote, in the same way the Labour Party's base vote, wants a solution which I think is a mistake. And you have to, at some point, you have to sort of face those things. So the Labour Party cannot take the position that I agree that it probably should take, and it can't. It will be because its base vote has decided that it wants a second referendum, and I think the Labour Party couldn't face an election without moving in that direction.
If it goes in this direction, you talk about it losing ground to the Lib Dems. How much more ground is it going to lose to the Brexit Party?
Not that much. Not as much.
Oh, I think
Not
you're
as
wrong.
much.
I think you're
This
wrong.
is the problem. I mean, that Ian Lavery tweet is a reminder of the problem with referendums. It's why I can't stand referendums like Clem Attlee and even Margaret Thatcher at one point. You have this kind of fetishising of a single vote 3 years ago, 17.4 million people, as if it's a fixed number of people just sitting around, monolithic, with no change in views, no change in people who are alive.
But they did vote to leave.
They did vote to leave. People also voted in a general election. We also have other general elections. This idea that one vote once and then we just sit around and worship but that's the problem with it. That's why you shouldn't have the... I was against the referendum.
But the referendum's happened.
Voted to have it. Agreed. But I also live in a country with parliamentary sovereignty. I do believe a Labour Party which did have a pro-Remain leader, and the problem is it doesn't have a pro-Remain leader. If it won a general election with a manifesto saying we're staying in, I think that would trump a referendum.
Well, let's stick with what the Labour Party is going to do now, because there was going to be a special meeting. A special meeting of the Shadow Cabinet was supposed to be happening to discuss the issue that Tom Watson was talking about, and that was full-throated support for the EU and Remain, and then pushing Labour to support it. But that meeting's been cancelled. So what does that say? The leadership...
Well, don't get me started on leadership. I mean, leadership is a disaster on this issue. Yes, a lot of them do listen to the stats that Suzanne put out and think it's going to be electorally damaging, but you can't sit on the fence. I have to go home and take a shower, but I agree with Tony Blair when he said recently Corbyn can't sit on the fence and play to both sides forever. It worked in 2017. As Danny points out, it probably won't work.
But Suzanne is saying they should sit on the other fence.
They should absolutely sit on the other fence. You know, if Labour wants to win a general election, which personally I sincerely hope it doesn't, but a bit of advice here, if Labour is going to win a general election, it's those target seats that it needs to reach are mostly leave voting target seats. So those marginal seats, like Warwick, like Watford.
But also, when you say hard-working people, just to address the hard-working people, you support a no-deal Brexit, which would destroy the economy. So when you talk about hard-working voters, your plan is the one that's going to... Every serious economist says it's going to destroy the British economy.
We're getting confused between the things that we think and what our analysis is of the impact on voters. My view is, if the Labour Party... I don't approve of having a second referendum, but if we did have a general election and the Labour Party allowed its vote to be split between themselves and the Liberal Democrats, it would get hammered if the Conservative Party took all the vote. You could get a no-deal Brexit in a general election in that way. So the Labour Party cannot take that position.
Rushanara, is there going to be a change from the leadership anytime soon?
Well, a lot of us are making representations to the leadership for a change, and I hope there is, because it's in the national interest.
I know you hope there is, but do you think there will be? Do you think there will be a declaration for a second referendum, whether or not it's possible?
There needs to be, in my view, and I hope that's what happens. It's not in my gift to make that decision, but I hope that the leader of the Labour Party does change the position of the Labour Party to make it absolutely clear that we are going to stop sitting on the fence and support a public vote. Because it's in the national interest to do so.
To ask to vote in favour of a referendum in the House of Commons, provide people with a voice, and then decide not to implement the result.
All right.
And I think that's
because we're going to finish it here. We're going to finish it here.
This in
Parliament.
Parliament.
The Labour Party's voted against every deal.
We're going to finish it here and talk about something else.
It's not a good enough deal.
You two. Now, I have to be very stern. We're going to talk about foreign policy for a change. It hasn't featured that much during this Tory leadership race, but the issue of rising hostilities between the US and Iran have become of great concern. Now, this follows attacks on 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman last week. The Americans are certain that Iran is to blame. Here is some footage of what happened, a mysterious explosion and the oil tanker on fire. This is footage taken from aerial surveillance. The Americans say it proves that the Iranians were behind it because that boat, the white boat alongside the hull of the oil tanker, is an Iranian, they say, Revolutionary Guards Corps patrol craft, and the Americans say they were removing an unexploded limpet mine from the ship. Tehran has denied all responsibility, as it has also denied responsibility for attacks on 4 tankers hit last month. It blames another state trying to destabilise the region. Mehdi?
So the Germans are saying they don't buy this intelligence. The Japanese, who own the tanker, say they have not seen any evidence, and the American arguments are not convincing. Let's be clear. I'm sure your viewers are well aware the Trump administration contains a bunch of hawks, a lot of them retreads from the Bush administration. The National Security Advisor John Bolton, the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo are on record for many years talking about their desire to bomb Iran. We've been seeing this escalation for a while. We don't know where Trump stands because, like Boris, he takes different positions on different days. It's very worrying. And my bigger issue is, even if it turns out that Iran is behind these attacks, and as I say, we haven't seen the evidence, even though Jeremy Hunt's jumped in supporting the Americans, even if they're behind the attacks, that just goes to show that pulling out the Iran nuclear deal was the disaster that a lot of us said it would be when Donald Trump did it.
Well, before we discuss that, let's hear from the Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, because he is, as you say, backing up the intelligence from the Americans and, no doubt, UK intelligence, and he also criticises Jeremy Corbyn for being sceptical.
We have done our own intelligence assessment, and the phrase we used is almost certain. You know, we've got videos of what happened. We've seen evidence. We don't believe anyone else could have done this. And, you know, what is extraordinary is that when you have that clear evidence of tankers being blown up in the Gulf, an incredibly destabilising thing, we have Jeremy Corbyn saying this is America's fault. And this just, I'm afraid, indicates that when it comes to the future safety and security of our country, this man should not be let into Downing Street.
But intelligence is fallible, Danny, as we know, and there will be references, obviously, to the Iraq war back in 2003. Is Jeremy Corbyn right to be sceptical?
I doubt it. I haven't obviously seen the intelligence myself, so I'm not in a position. I'm astonished at what Mehdi said. I wonder who he thinks did do it, and it would be very interesting.
Do you want to tell the Japanese?
Hang on.
It wasn't just what I said. I quoted the Japanese Prime Minister.
The Japanese Prime Minister appears on the panel and
starts to make... tanker, isn't it?
He's not appearing this week. Let me just say that.
To make prognostications, and we can listen to him. But it was you who said that you doubted it, so I was wondering who you thought did do it. Jeremy Hunt and the British intelligence service are highly likely to be correct, and I would have a tendency to believe them. It's not infallible, of course. It does make logic. Of course, it casts question, actually, on, as Mehdi, I think, does correctly say, it does cast question on the tensions that you heightened by the Americans withdrawing from the sanctions deal. I didn't think that was correct decision by them, but I don't think you can then say that it's America's fault if Iran did do that. So my tendency would be to believe the Foreign Secretary and the British intelligence services.
I didn't say it was America's fault, just to be clear. I said it's the US responsible for bringing us to a point of tension by pulling out of a deal that had got rid of tensions.
Okay,
that's the point. And when you have people in administration who openly want war with Iran, that's a problem. I don't hear you saying anything about that.
Rushanara, what do you think about Jeremy Corbyn's stance on this? He's a Privy Councillor. He would have had access to that intelligence. He obviously doesn't believe the Foreign Office.
Well, look, the issue is, what do you do about this, and how do you avoid an escalation of conflict? And we have to learn the lessons of Iraq. We have to learn the lessons of other military interventions that have been very problematic. And what we need to do is look at how the international community de-escalates this and returns to negotiation and returns to maintaining peace, because that region has had conflict after conflict. And I think that's what the focus needs to be, rather than a debate about how reliable intelligence is, because, of course, history tells us that it's mixed, the reliability of intelligence.
But who do we think would have done it if not the Iranians?
I have no idea. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm 100% with Jeremy Hunt. I think there is clear evidence.
He says he's almost certain.
Well, yeah, that's 100% in agreement. I'm almost certain too. I think, you know, there's clear evidence that Iran was responsible. The intelligence suggests it is. The weaponry that was used, the similarity to other attacks that have taken place in the area. I think what deeply concerns me, and Roshani, you're absolutely right, we've got to try and de-escalate this somehow, but is Jeremy Corbyn, by once again siding with a left-wing despotic theocracy, actually going to help this matter? You know, it's reminiscent of the whole Salisbury nerve agent attack. Every single time Jeremy Corbyn goes against the Western interests, and he goes against British intelligence. Every single time this happens, he sides with the aggressors in this.
Hang on.
I was just going to say, yeah.
This idea that if you oppose escalation or if you question evidence, you're supporting a despotic theocracy is madness. It's offensive. I feel like I've got a time machine.
But is the evidence compelling?
2003.
Is the evidence compelling?
Can I finish my point? 2003, Jeremy Corbyn was siding with despotic Saddam Hussein, in your view. He was right about that. Jeremy Hunt and the Tory party were wrong about that. Danny, with respect, was wrong about that. So let's just have some humility here before we start talking about, the evidence.
Hang on. Can I answer that?
My point is, even if they did do the attack, that doesn't mean we should be escalating.
All right, Mehdi, let her answer, because we haven't got much time on the programme.
They didn't do it. I said I want to see evidence of it.
Totally
and I don't
agree
think
with
Jeremy
you
Hunt or Mike Pompeo on
about the first Gulf War. Yeah, the way in which the Conservative Party then actually disputed at first that Saddam Hussein was being aggressive against the Kurdish people, for instance, was absolutely wrong. I 100% agree with you. But my concern is Jeremy Corbyn is always too quick to give our people who are not our allies the benefit of the doubt, and I think that potentially, as he is,
the biggest liar in the history of modern politics.
Stop interrupting.
Yeah, Trump has made it very clear he does not want war. Remember, one of his election pledges was for America not to get involved in any more foreign wars. So he's actually putting his neck on the block here. That is a responsible commitment that he made that is now in jeopardy.
We're going to have to move on, Mehdi, because it's about you. Mehdi Hasan used to be a journalist working here in the UK. He's now based in the States, working as a presenter for Al Jazeera. We're going to show you some of the stuff he does and start with him challenging Trump's assertion that new steel facilities in the US have been reopened.
During the campaign that there's 6 to 7 steel facilities that are going to be opened up. There are no. US Steel has not announced any facilities. Why did he say they've announced new facilities? That's a lie, isn't it?
No, it isn't, because there are a lot of companies opening up. There are steel facilities that are going to be opening up, or I think they actually want to open
Stephen,
up in
that's not what he said. I know it's difficult for you. I know you want to try and defend him.
Would you kill the family of a terror suspect? Yes or no?
I would have to see what the circumstances of that situation was.
Are you kidding me?
I would have to see the circumstances of that situation.
What circumstances would justify the killing of a family, a wife and a child?
It would have to be the circumstances that we were facing at the time.
That's you in action. Here you are in the studio here. How would you describe the state of US politics?
Batshit. It's
you can't say that.
Sorry,
apologies.
Crazy apologies. Crazy. It was an instinctive response to the craziness of that world.
And I have to apologise to our viewers for that.
I apologise. It was the second word I meant to say.
Right.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. I've never seen anything like that in my life, in my working career. Every day is mentally, intellectually, emotionally, physically exhausting, keeping up with the sheer quantity of controversy, scandal, gaffe, lie, outrage. The president over the weekend accused the New York Times of treason. It's just another Saturday.
Well, look, we're looking ahead to Donald Trump launching his campaign to win a second term as president. But he has criticised internal polling that seems to show that he would be behind one of the Democrat hopefuls, Joe Biden, in some key states. What do you make of that?
Well, I think he might be. I think he only won last time because of the way the votes lay across states. It was actually quite mathematically, statistically, it was quite difficult to win when you're that far behind in the national vote. And usually in a second term, a president will fall back a bit. So I think he will struggle to be re-elected just on, one of the reasons I thought it was quite possible he'd be elected was because he was a Republican candidate. So the sheer maths of normal presidential elections. But I would agree with Mehdi, these are not normal elections. A minute ago, I think he suggested that Donald Trump was sort of worse than Iran. I can't agree with that. Maybe misunderstood.
I
think you did actually, but I think you said he was the worst liar in the world in the context of Iran. The truth is that you're certainly correct that he's the worst presidential liar in history, which is certainly extraordinary.
What do you think, though, up against the Democrat hopefuls? There are an awful lot of them. It's a very crowded field. But do you think he might struggle?
24 candidates.
I thought it was 23. It's gone up again.
The Tories don't have anything on the Democratic Party, and they're about to have the first TV debates next week in the US, which hopefully will whittle it down 2 nights of 10 a night. There's some interesting frontrunners. I'm not as negative and pessimistic about the Democratic field as some are. I think there's some very strong candidates. All of them are actually leading Trump in head-to-head matchups, all of the major candidates, although, polls, pinch of salt, shovel of salt, all of that
And there's
stuff.
time still.
And there's a lot of time. I mean, 2 years ago, at this stage in the 2016 cycle, Jeb Bush
was leading in the polls and Donald Trump was polling at 1%. He beat all 16 of his rivals. I don't do predictions anymore since Brexit and Trump.
Rushanara, what do you think? I mean, you know, Joe Biden, there's also obviously a whole range of other people, including Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris.
Yep. I mean, I think the Democrats do have some very interesting candidates. I hope that they do manage to win the election, but given what's happened, it's very hard to guess what's going to happen. But also, what we know from our experience of the last US elections is do not underestimate Donald Trump.
Well, I think that's probably a wise proposition from all of us here. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
There you go, folks. That's the first show on this channel. I will be back tomorrow for some more Politics Live, plus the BBC debate as well. I'll be streaming that. Hopefully the fucking BBC will strike me into oblivion, but we'll find out afterwards, I guess. I'm going to have to make a video now for the other channel as well, to get the people back over here. So don't forget to subscribe. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell so you can get the streams. Yeah. I know it's annoying people, but don't blame me. It's Channel 4's fucking problem. They nuked my channel, so yeah. But yeah, I'll be doing more usual streams, question time, Politics Live, blah blah blah. So it'll just be the same as it was on the other channel. So yeah. But thank you for your support. Obviously, big shout out to patrons and donators and all these beautiful people. You make it a little bit easier for me to do these streams and stuff. I might have an update soon because I want to actually, maybe not yet, but in time I'm gonna sort out a web page instead of using YouTube. I think that'll be the best solution actually, and then I won't get fucking harassed. Fucking changing channels because it's a bit annoying and all that shit. Anyway, instead of me waffling on, I will let you enjoy your beautiful day because it's only, what is it now, 1 o'clock. I will see you later. Peace out, people. Peace out.